what's important here is something the commentators of Aqidah Tahawiyyah bring, is how in this passage it shows the clear message of us having to follow the Prophet Muhammad. And in order to follow the Prophet Muhammad, we have to turn to the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. We have to turn to the sunnah. And so the reason why Imam Tahawi is making this point specifically is because during his time there was a rise of the sect called like the Qur'ani sect, which is a sect of people that say that you only follow the Qur'an and the narrations were compiled by men, so you just ignore it, even though the Qur'an tells you to follow the Sunnah of the Prophet. But you know, we had that discussion before. We can have that another time, inshallah. And the Prophet, he's the one who actually prophesied this, right? He said in a narration in Tirmidhi that I do not want to see any one of you reclining on his couch, and when he hears my instructions and prohibitions, he says, I don't accept it because we didn't find such a thing in the Book of Allah. SubhanAllah, like the Prophet is warning us against this. You know? And so it's not legitimate also for us to make extreme comparisons of the Prophet to the rest of the prophets. So something that other religions, other nations in the past have also fallen error to is almost degrading other prophets in order to kind of like show that the prophet that was sent to them is the best one. But that's not our way. That's not what we do, right? The Prophet, yes, he's the chief of messenger. He is the best messenger. He's the most honorable amongst the messengers. But also when it comes to the message and honor itself, لا نفرق بين أحد من الرسل. We don't differentiate amongst the prophets. They all came with the same message. They all came with Tawheed. They all came with La ilaha illallah. And so we have that honor and respect for all the prophets. And this is again that a statement Sunni Muslims may find obvious, but you'd be surprised at how we can fall into some very tricky situations here. So the next topic has to do with the wahy itself, right? وَكُلُّ دَعْوَ النُّبُوَّةِ بَعْدُهُ فَغَيُّ وَهَوَى. That every claim to prophethood after him is a falsehood and comes from a person's desire. This is very important because there are many things in our life that we may fall into error to, or we can fall into error to in this regard. What does this mean? For example, when we say like, oh, I felt like Allah spoke to me, right? No, that's impossible because that is a characteristic that is reserved only for prophethood. However, you can have inspiration from Allah, right? You can have inspiration from Allah, no problem. Or when someone has a dream and they testify that their dream is 100% true and everybody has to follow their dream. A dream is a portion, true dreams are a portion of wahy. But if it doesn't come from a prophet, it doesn't come from a prophet or a prophet before him, then we treat that dream like any other dream. If it has benefit, then alhamdulillah, we take that benefit and we move on. It's a gift from Allah and all that, but we don't derive rulings and hukum and make it a sharia and say you have to follow this because I had this dream and etc. Right? Another example of this is a problem when people take portions of prophethood and apply it to themselves and take other portions of prophethood and reject it. Like someone saying that something is no longer an obligation because of different time and a different society, different morals. So therefore we're not going to say that this is an obligation anymore. Or that, so this is another portion of prophethood that people are not allowed to engage in because the Prophet Muhammad was given the position of the lawgiver of our ummah. And his laws never contradict the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we think, based on our morality and our society, we can change the laws of Islam and what was made haram by Allah and His Messenger, then we actually indirectly fall into the trap of claiming prophethood ourselves. Because we're changing the religion. This is a claim to prophethood. Even though it's indirect, which is ultimately playing with fire. وهو المبعوث إلى عامة والجن وكافة الورى بالحق والهدى وبالنور والضياء. That he is the one who has been sent to all the jinn and all mankind with truth and guidance and with light and illumination. So he was sent to all the beings, all the beings that were given an ability of choice. And the words nur here and nur diya are the words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses to characterize the message of the Prophet ﷺ, and they all have their own reflections. Because without light, we can't see. And when you can't see, you end up making mistakes and bumping into things. Even for children, the absence of light is a very scary, frightening feeling. So what is associated here is that even though we have a fitrah, we have this purity that is involved, then we also need guidance. We need light. In order, so right now, as a human being, when they're first born, they have something called the fitrah. And so they are a human being, but they're in darkness. And so they need light to come to show them the guidance of where to go. And when they're shown that light, it appeals to them. And this is actually something that is very powerful. One of the most powerful descriptions of the Prophet ﷺ in the Quran is قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِنِّي رَسُولُ اللَّهِ إِلَيْكُمْ جَمِيعًا. That I am the messenger of all of mankind for everybody. That I'm the messenger of all of mankind for everybody. So he was a messenger to all the people. His role is not limited to those who are already Muslim. We fall into this trap a lot. So we don't say like the Prophet ﷺ is our prophet, for example, like I mentioned earlier, right? It's actually, I probably shouldn't have said it that way. It's probably a mistake, actually. The Prophet ﷺ is everybody's prophet. Isa ﷺ is everybody's prophet. The other prophets were sent to certain nations, and the Prophet ﷺ was sent to all of mankind. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his message, it actually appeals to everybody. Sometimes we're very nervous, very scared to share the message of the Prophet ﷺ because we feel like, oh, people aren't going to be receptive to it. But people have a fitrah. Even if they come with negative backlash, I'm telling you, somewhere in their heart, in their mind, they're thinking. Somewhere in their heart, in their mind, they're like, this actually makes sense, but I can't admit right now that it makes sense, so I'm just going to keep going. It happens all the time. You just talk to people, and those with an open heart, you will see them just accepting this. It appeals to them. If you light a candle, you're not the only one benefiting. Everybody around you also benefits. And so this is what we wanted to take away from this part of Imam Tahawiy's text, that the Prophet ﷺ isn't just a prophet for the Muslims, but he's a prophet to all mankind. And his message appeals to all. And this verse also gives us that confidence. And Islam is always relevant. And the Prophet ﷺ was the best example of this. He kept Islam relevant to everybody. He would keep Islam relevant in many different ways. And when we try to keep this, and when we work, when the scholars work together to keep Islam relevant in the areas that are allowed to do so, not changing haram into halal or halal into haram, I'm not talking about that stuff, but the things that are more gray, then you'll find massive benefits. Because the Prophet was also an extremely emotionally intelligent individual. He didn't give da'wah to every individual the same way. He gave different forms of da'wah to people, because he understood their temperaments. He understood what they enjoyed, what they didn't enjoy. Two examples that always blew my mind is one is an example of Abu Sufyan. And Abu Sufyan radiallahu anh, was a staunch enemy of Islam. And he accepted Islam towards the end of the life of the Prophet Muhammad. And when he accepted Islam, he repented, he was forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when they were entering the city of Mecca, right, Abu Sufyan has just accepted Islam, and now his city is about to be conquered. He was the leader of the Quraysh. So with this, Abu Sufyan is obviously going to feel some type of way. Okay, his city is about to be conquered, and he was the leader of that city, and he had just accepted Islam. So he's still kind of like, the faith is not 100% there. So in order to strengthen the faith of Abu Sufyan, what does the Prophet ﷺ do? He gives him something to be proud of. And what he does is when he enters the masjid, he says, anybody that enters the house of Abu Sufyan will be safe. So now Abu Sufyan still feels he still feels like he's honored. He still feels like he is still a leader in some way. And that allowed Abu Sufyan to become closer to the deen. And now we say, radiallahu anhu, a man that used to kill Sahaba, and now we're saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him. Right? Another example is the example of Rukan, which is one of my favorite stories of the Prophet Muhammad, where the Prophet Muhammad, there was a man in Rukan during the time when they were doing the da'wah in Mecca. And And so the first 13 years of the da'wah. And he was known to be the greatest wrestler of all time. He was extremely powerful, undefeated, never lost a match. He was the Khabib of his time. MashaAllah. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, one day he's passing by Rukana, who did not like the Prophet ﷺ at the time. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, or Rukana sees him and he goes the other direction. And he says, oh Rukana, I want to talk to you. And so Rukana's like, I don't want to hear from you. And so the Prophet ﷺ, you know what he does? He says, no. Don't worry about, Islam and Muslim and all that stuff right now. I want to wrestle you. And he was like, what? Okay, like if that's the thing. He says, but under one condition though. If I win, then you have to become Muslim. And Rukana, he said, of course, right? Because you need the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to win. So I know you're true if you win. Now I'm paraphrasing the story, of course, for the sake of time, so take it with a grain of salt. But the message is there. So Rukana and the Prophet ﷺ, the whole town hears about this, and they come to see the Prophet ﷺ and Rukana wrestle. Everybody's there. If Muhammad Ali and George Foreman had Rumble in the jungle, this is Rumble in the desert, mashallah. And so, the match begins, and within seconds, the Prophet ﷺ puts Rukana on his back, body slams him. And Rukana is shocked. And he says, no, it's luck, that's a fluke. Right, again. And so they go again. Seconds, the Prophet ﷺ puts him on his back, destroys him. And Rukana's like, no way, again, something's going on here. I'm not squared up right. So then they go again, and the third time it happens again. And then Rukana stands up and he says, Ashhadu la ilaha illallah, ashhadu annaka rasulullah. I bear witness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is no God except Allah, and that you are the messenger of Allah. He believed in that moment. But what's so powerful about the story is not just how awesome our Prophet Muhammad was, but also the fact that he appealed to Rukana's nature. He says, if I want this man to become Muslim, I gotta meet him where he's at. And that's something that we often forget. Right? Now the last thing I want to mention is the humanity of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ is the greatest of human beings. He is the greatest, and we have to honor him, we have to show that respect. We don't treat him like any other normal human being. There are certain, when we say his name, we say sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? We send salawat upon him during our salah. Right? We have all these different things to show honor and respect for the Prophet, and we have love for him, and we want to love him more than anybody else. But the most important thing about Aqidah is what? What did we discuss? You guys remember the most important thing about Aqidah? Does anybody remember? Sorry? Not quite. But yes, that's a beautiful answer, but not quite what I'm looking for. Tawheed, right? The oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you have the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have the most important aspect of your faith. And so, what's beautiful is although the Prophet ﷺ was the perfect example, he was still limited. And I'll give you an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's the merciful. And the Prophet ﷺ is the most merciful amongst human beings. And so there's a companion by the name of Wahshi. Or Wahshi, radiallahu anhu, wasn't Muslim during before. And so Abu Sufyan wasn't Muslim, he was the leader of the Quraysh and Hind. Okay? And when it came to the battle of Badr is where he killed Hamza, right? Uhud. Okay, sorry, Uhud. Battle of Uhud. When it comes to the battle of Uhud, Hind, who's the wife of Abu Sufyan, has a slave by the name of Wahshi. And she tells this slave Wahshi, by the way, they all become Muslim, right? But at this point, they're not Muslim. She tells the slave Wahshi to, if you can kill the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, Hamza radiallahu anhu, then I will free you. So now Wahshi, he goes to this battle, and the only thing that he can think about is, that's my target. And so he gets to the battle, and he takes a spear, and he targets Hamza radiallahu anhu, and he kills Hamza radiallahu anhu, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. This was a very difficult, traumatizing moment for the Prophet ﷺ. He was very distraught, hurt by this, by the death of his uncle. So when Wahshi came and accepted Islam, he said, I forgive you, Allah forgives you. However, it's very difficult for me to see your face and not think about my uncle. So, with all due respect, if you can, maybe avoid being in my line of sight, that would be best. And I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been for Wahshi. But I think this is a very profound lesson that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward Wahshi accordingly for having to go through that pain. That this is a wisdom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put him through to remind us that although the Prophet ﷺ is the most merciful human being, his mercy still has a limit. It still has a limit. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is limitless. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that we worship, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is our greatest example of how to worship the only one that we worship. Wallahu ta'ala bisawab. What time is it? I can take 2 questions, inshallah. If anybody has any questions. That's what
I actually have 2 questions. The first one's tangentially related. It's in regards to the qualities of the Prophet ﷺ. You talked about in the Prophet sometimes all the qualities of the previous prophets, right?
Yeah.
So I know we divide the categories of the previous prophets into Janali and Jalali attributes, correct?
Yes.
So do we see the Prophet ﷺ is in the direct middle, or do we see he encompasses all?
That's a good question. I always thought of it as he encompasses all, but I can ask about that, inshallah.
What the question was?
So the question is that essentially the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is known to have the characteristics of all the prophets before him. And so the prophets before him, they were split into categories of Jamali characteristics and Jalali characteristics, right? So do we say when the Prophet ﷺ encompassed all of them, was he like a wasat version of all of them, or did he encompass all of them, right? Because I know, for example, let's say like Yusuf alayhi salam. There's a narration where it says that Yusuf alayhi salam was given half of beauty. And so some scholars interpret this as he was given half of beauty of the entire world, and other scholars actually interpret this as says that he was given half of beauty of the Prophet ﷺ, because the Prophet ﷺ was the most beautiful, right? There's different interpretation there. So like, was the Prophet ﷺ in terms of like Yusuf alayhi salam's beauty a wasat version, or like having that encompassed beauty as well? In other examples where Musa alayhi salam was known for like his strength, he was a very strong individual, right? So the Prophet ﷺ had to have the exact strength of the Musa alayhi salam, or was it a more like balanced version of all the prophets combined? And wallahu ta'ala, I'm not sure the exact answer, but whenever I reflected on it, I usually just kind of think of all. But again, wallahu a'lam. That would explain why he beat Rukayna though, right? Any other second question? Sorry?
I can ask you, I can talk about later, inshallah, just someone else can ask a question.
Okay, yeah, sure. There's an online question here. Okay, it's not relevant to the class, we can get that later, inshallah. Any questions from the sisters? No? Okay, alhamdulillah. If you have any questions, I'll be here after salah, inshallah. We have to break for salah now though. Jazakallah khair. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Salamun alaykum wa alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allah